buying a Bitcoin, whether it's one Bitcoin or a million Satoshis or 100,000 Satoshis or one Satoshi, is just like buying into New York City 250 years ago.
So today we're going to be running the numbers to prove why 0.015 Bitcoin will not only be enough to make you rich, but it will be enough to put you into the new millionaire class on a Bitcoin standard. Now don't get me wrong, I get it. 0.015 Bitcoin is only worth about $950 of local fiat currency today. And I get that this doesn't really sound like a whole lot of money, but the 9 charts we're going to be looking at today is going to help to explain why this tiny investment in Bitcoin today will make you rich, okay? So this entire thesis is based upon the fact that Bitcoin is very, very scarce. We've probably all seen websites like these. If you divide the 21 million Bitcoin amongst the 8 billion people on the planet, you get around 236,000 Satoshis per person. But guess what? The world does not work like that. The wealth in the world actually follows, guess what? A power law. It's a power law called the Pareto's principle. Now, Pareto's principle simply says that you're going to get about 80% of the results from only 20% of the participants, okay? And global wealth follows a similar kind of distribution, okay? It's a little bit more skewed towards the wealthy, where the top 1% of the wealthiest people on the planet actually own about 50% of the assets and the wealth. Now, things get interesting when we actually apply a Pareto's principle wealth distribution onto the 21 million Bitcoin, and we have a look at what this kind of distribution will actually mean for your individual Bitcoin stack. Now, this is one of my favorite tables I've seen in the Bitcoin space. It has 10 different rows. I know there's a lot going on, but we're only going to be looking at 3 very specific rows on this table. We want to know, how much Bitcoin do you need to become a part of the new billionaire class on a Bitcoin standard? How much Bitcoin you need to become a part of the large public companies on a Bitcoin standard? And we finally also want to know how much Bitcoin you need to become a part of that new millionaire class, okay? So we know that in the world today, there's about 2,500 people who are considered to be billionaires, okay? We know that there's also about 58,000 large public companies, and we know that there's somewhere around 60 million millionaires, okay? So when we make one small assumption and we assume that about 16 million of the total 21 million Bitcoin are actually available for sale, we get this really cool little chart, okay? And we can see that to become a new part of the billionaire status or the billionaire club, you're going to need around 120 Bitcoin. We can see that there's probably going to be around 5,000 people on the total planet who are going to have this amount of Bitcoin if we do assume this Pareto's principle wealth distribution on a Bitcoin standard. We can also see that to become a new mega corporation or as big as one of the 58,000 public companies in the world today, you're only going to need 10 Bitcoin. That is it. And we can see that there's going to be around 65,000 different entities, individuals, or even corporations who will be able to own this amount of Bitcoin. And then to become a part of the new millionaire club, you're only going to need 0.06 Bitcoin to be a part of this very astute club. And we can see that there's only going to be enough Bitcoin in the planet for around 80 million of these new millionaires to hold 6 million Satoshis, okay? That is only worth $3,900 today, okay? But you guys might be thinking, hang on a minute, $3,900, that's a lot more than that original $975 that we originally promised you in the introduction of today's video would be enough to get you into that millionaire club. Well, that's because we haven't entirely run the numbers yet, but I want to show you guys a couple of more interesting things about this chart before we tell that entire story, okay? I want to have a look here and I want to just kind of highlight something. We can see in this hypothetical world that the top 2% of people would own 56% of all of the Bitcoin in the world, okay? And we can also see something else that's pretty strange. We can see that the classes of individuals who are suffering from poverty, or they may find themselves in the middle class and the lower class, they only hold 10% of the wealth, despite making up 85% of the population, okay? I think those are just some pretty mind-blowing numbers for people to kind of get their head around, because when you really think about it, if we assume Pareto's principle is accurate on a Bitcoin standard, what we are saying is that 85% of the people in the entire world, they are all going to own less than 2 million Bitcoin. Okay, think about that for a second. In a normal Pareto's principle distribution, 85% of people hold less than 10% of the wealth, okay? If we're assuming 16 million of the coins are available for sale, 10% of that is 1.6 million Bitcoin. And that 1.6 million Bitcoin is going to have to be spread across over 6 billion people, or 85% of the entire globe's population, okay? This is massive, okay? Just think about that for a minute. 1.6 million Bitcoin. It's not a lot of Bitcoin. The 9 new ETFs that have been trading for about 4 months now, they already own more than 500,000 Bitcoin already. So they already own around 1/3 of that total amount of Bitcoin that's going to be available for 85% of the world's population, okay? Just a crazy statistic I wanted to drop into the video. Now, let's move on, because that first scenario that we just looked at and analyzed isn't entirely accurate, because we know that there's probably less than 16 million Bitcoin actually available for sale, okay? But you can consider that the more conservative estimate. Let's get a little bit more bullish, and let's maybe have a look at an estimate or an analysis on, let's say, the slightly more bullish side of things, okay? We know that today there's only 2 million Bitcoin actually sitting on exchanges available for sale. And if you were to actually have a look at the HODL waves, we can see that the amount of Bitcoin that actually hasn't moved in more than 3 years is more than half of the total supply, okay? So I actually think that in the future, there's going to be far less Bitcoin available for sale than 16 million. So we have Michael Saylor, the CEO of a public company that holds tens of billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, is openly telling you he's not selling his Bitcoin for 100 years. But then we also have a number of other very interesting data points that I think suggests the billionaires are getting involved into Bitcoin, and a good chunk of these billionaires are not going to sell their Bitcoin for a very long time. I think pension funds are a great example of this potential future, okay? Recently, we just had the 9th largest pension fund in America invest around $160 million into Bitcoin via these new Bitcoin ETFs. We also have Japan's $1 trillion pension fund coming out there and making an announcement a couple of months ago saying that they are investigating Bitcoin. Do you guys really think they haven't bought Bitcoin before they actually made that public statement of just investigating Bitcoin? I'm not so sure, but I do think that Bitcoin is getting more and more scarce, and it will get even scarcer in the future when more and more Bitcoin is gobbled up by these entities who have a very, very, very long time horizon for their Bitcoin position. And we also know that only 3 to 4 million of the Bitcoin in the total 19.5 million that have been mined are actually classified as highly liquid. This means that they go onto and off to the exchanges every 6 months or so, okay? The rest of the supply is actually not available for sale. And that's where I want to get a little bit more bullish and run you through a second scenario from this really cool chart that I did find on Twitter. Again, credit where credit is due. I think Lukey Broyles put this one together, and we can see for his second estimation, he assumes what a world might look like if only 4 million of the total 21 million Bitcoin are actually available for sale, and the numbers are absolutely shocking. We can see that if you want to become a part of the new billionaire class of Bitcoiner, you only need around $30 Bitcoin. And there is around 5,000 entities who could theoretically accumulate this amount of Bitcoin, assuming this Pareto's principle distribution. We can also see that if you want to become a new class of the public corporations or a mega company, you only need 2.5 Bitcoin, and there will be around 65,000 entities who should be able to accumulate around this amount of Bitcoin. And then to become a part of the new millionaire class in Bitcoin, you will only need to buy 0.015 Bitcoin, and there's only ever going to be around 80 million people who should be able to buy this amount of Bitcoin, assuming the Pareto's principle is applied onto a Bitcoin standard. Now, in a second, we are going to show you why absolutely anyone around the world, whether they're earning $16,000 a year, $60,000 a year, or even $6,000 a year, could theoretically accumulate 0.1 Bitcoin if they made the right decisions, and they could do that without even doing something crazy like taking out leverage or getting debt. We're just going to show you the power of compound interest and a DCA calculator. But let's first kind of slow down, okay? So that is the maths for why $975 could make you rich and could put you in the new class of millionaires on a Bitcoin standard. But how many people can actually afford to do that? And how realistic is this Pareto's principle distribution in the future? Well, let's have a look at both of those questions. So we can see today there is 4.5 million Bitcoin addresses that hold 0.1 Bitcoin. But then you also have to remember that most people hold more than one address. Just think about it for a second. If you have one wallet, think about how many different addresses that one wallet will generate you. And some Bitcoiners have multiple different wallets. Okay, so it is very, very, very unlikely that more than 1 million people actually hold more than 0.1 Bitcoin when we really run the numbers. So Bitcoin is scarce, okay? And not many people own 0.1 Bitcoin. But even when we look at the fiat situation, owning 0.1 Bitcoin could mean more and more in the future, especially when you consider that the average median income for the entire world is only around $16,000, okay? To buy 0.1 Bitcoin today, at the time of recording, you need around $6,500, okay? So that is already a significant chunk of someone's average income, okay? If someone's earning $16,000, what's the likelihood they can find a spare, $6,500 worth of chump change to plow into Bitcoin, okay? Pretty unlikely, okay? We all know that most people are really, really struggling to find any spare change for an emergency, for example. If we were to look at this study, they actually found that 44% of Americans could not even come up with $1,000 for an emergency. And we can see very clearly that the amount of credit card debt in America is hitting record levels at the same time that the personal savings rate is at an all-time low. And this is all happening because the cost of living is just getting way too much for the everyday person to deal with. And they are absolutely fed up with it. So now let's break out this DCA calculator and show you the best way to accumulate that 0.015 Bitcoin that we showed you earlier on in the video was enough to put you in the new millionaire club, okay? And we're going to also show you why absolutely anybody can do it, okay? So before we get there, I want to show you the first example. So this is a DCA calculator. And what we've done here is we have assumed that you've invested $20 into Bitcoin every week for the past 3 years, okay? Doesn't matter if Bitcoin was at $70,000 or $17,000, that week you buy $20 a Bitcoin. And if you would have done that over the past 3 years, you would see that you've invested around $3,000 into Bitcoin, and that $3,000 investment today is actually worth over $6,000, so your money has more than doubled, but more importantly, you have accumulated around 10 million Satoshis. So that means that you own 10% of a Bitcoin or 0.1 Bitcoin. Again, that was the amount of Bitcoin that we showed you was enough to put you in the top 1% on a Bitcoin standard, okay? But let's look at the second example I've got for you, because some people might be thinking, oh yeah, okay, $20 a week, it's not a ton of money, But somebody in the third world can't put $20 a week in a Bitcoin. Some people in the third world don't even earn $20 a week. But I've got an example and a DCA example that will show you that anybody could accumulate a life-changing amount of Bitcoin, and an amount of Bitcoin that could put them in a very rare class of wealthy individuals. So let's have a look at this DCA calculator. This shows that if you invested $3 into Bitcoin every single week over the past 3 years, you would have invested around $471 into Bitcoin over those 3 years. And we can see that today, that initial investment is now worth over $1,000. Okay, it has more than doubled, but more importantly, it is worth 0.015 Bitcoin. Okay, you guys can see it clear as day. That is 1.5 million Satoshis. And as we showed earlier, that is enough Bitcoin to put you in the new class of millionaires. Okay, only 80 million people can accumulate 0.015 Bitcoin if we assume that only 4 million Bitcoin are available for sale, and if we assume that a Pareto's principle distribution will apply onto a Bitcoin standard. So there you have it. Anybody can become rich. All you have to do is act now, okay? Because again, time is running out. There is only 1.9 billion Bitcoin sitting on exchanges for sale today. And if the past 4 years of data continues extrapolated out into the future, we're going to have 0 Bitcoin sitting on exchanges by 2027. Okay, so if you want to learn a little bit more about what happens to the price of Bitcoin when there are 0 Bitcoin on exchanges, and how the Bitcoin multiplier effect changes the lower that amount of Bitcoin on exchanges gets, you are going to absolutely love the recent video that I filmed with the one and the only Freddy Krueger. I'm going to put a link to that video up on screen somewhere around there. And while we're kind of looking at what kind of Bitcoin investment is going to be enough to make you rich in the future, you're going to absolutely love the video we filmed looking at BlackRock's 2024 secret closed door meeting, where they discussed the optimal allocation to make you rich on a Bitcoin standard. If you missed that video, you can check it out by clicking on the link somewhere around there. And with all that said, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the 2 videos I put up on screen up over my shoulders, and I'll see you guys in the next one.